Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. The Dennis Miller Show lives on Blogging Heads TV in the form of his mug.
Oh, so we're connected to MSM now, or is that defunct MSM? Is his show dead, I hope?
His show's dead. It's not clear we want to be connected to his show, but it was a fun show.
No, it wasn't, but let's don't get sidetracked on that.
So I guess first up is Alito.
Okay, I hope you've been paying attention.
I've been paying some attention, sort of retrospective attention. My impression is he's in like Flynn. The Democratic attacks have been ineffectual, but there are two issues that are worth going over. One is this brouhaha over concerned alumni of Princeton. The other is whether he satisfied your more important concerns about executive power. Now, you went to Princeton. I've seen you do your tiger dance and the chest pounding.
Pretty much every night.
Rah-rah thing. You like to keep it under wraps, I know. But what do you know about concerned alumni of Princeton? Were they a vicious, racist, sexist group? Who were they? Would you hold it against him that he was a member?
I actually was writing something for some periodical, maybe a local newspaper when I was an undergraduate, and asked the university's attorney to characterize their ideology, and he said, unhappy with the modern world. And I'd say that's about right. They were just kind of generally reactionary. Now, they were, I guess, it's been reported that they were opposed to affirmative action, right?
Right,
but that's actually kind of misleading. There was a kind of affirmative action they liked very much, and that was affirmative action in favor of children of alumni. And in fact, that's largely, I think, the reason they were upset about other forms of affirmative action, because there was a zero-sum game among the different forms of affirmative action. You can't give preference to everyone. The admissions office already had a systematic bias in favor of so-called legacies,
right. That
is to say, applicants who are children of alumni. And for CAP, for Concerned Alumni of Princeton, it was not a pronounced enough bias. They wanted more. So they favored affirmative action for overprivileged people. That was their official position. And I doubt anybody asked Alito about that even. That would have been maybe a more fair question than the questions he was asked about CAP, although so long as he denies even remembering the membership he once bragged about.
He said he only joined because they opposed ROTC. The ROTC on campus, and
you mean they favored it and they opposed people who opposed it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, one would ordinarily think that that's just spin. He's just trying to find a little narrow issue on which he agrees with them. But since he was in ROTC, it has some plausibility. Plus, you know, so he was unhappy with the modern world 20 years ago. I mean, you know. Is that he didn't express vicious racist views. He just wanted to keep Princeton a nice, clubby thing for alumni and their friends. I mean,
yeah, no, I don't remember them having an image as being racist. They were concerned about a lot of things. They were not friends with the Gay Alliance of Princeton. That was GAP. So there was a little GAP-CAP tension. They were concerned about drug use on campus and so on. But I don't remember them being thought of as especially racist.
Yeah. Plus, isn't he like a working-class Italian guy? So would normally not be comfortable with the clubby atmosphere that some people in CAP would want to establish. In theory.
Perhaps. Was he there in the early 70s?
Well, CAP was founded in 72. I do not know when he was there.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
Okay, well, moving on from CAP, which would turn out to be a bust because they got these records and they couldn't find his name anywhere in them. On the serious issue of executive power, it seems to me that he gave you, I'm just looking for barely enough to show that he believes there are some limits on executive power, and I think he established that in the new.
He claimed it, or he actually showed it by pointing to his history.
He didn't point to his history, but he as an article in the New Republic. By a guy named Ethan Lieb pointed out, he was surprisingly candid in answering some questions, unlike Roberts. And for one, he pointed to Justice Jackson's dissent in Youngstown, where he said, well, if Congress has intervened in a policy area, then the president's inherent authority is limited. It's a doctrine that doesn't make any sense to me, but It would imply that in the FISA case, for example, where Congress clearly sort of intended to occupy the field, or at least have a presence in the area of wiretapping, the president couldn't say, well, screw Congress, screw whatever the law is, I have inherent power. So that was at least a huge bone to throw to the people who want to cabin the president's power, and Leib says his view is nuanced, and sort of that's all we ask. The other is this brouhaha over his unitary. The only weapon the liberals the Democrats have been able to come up with is this concept of the unitary executive, which has nothing to do really with the scope of the
That's the idea that the president alone can speak for the executive. I mean, the executive is vested wholly in the president.
It's a perfectly reasonable theory. What it holds is, I mean, we may not be able to apply it, but what it holds is if you want democratic accountability, then the president has to be in charge of the executive branch.
But it says nothing about the relative power of the executive versus the congressional.
Right. It says it's basically an argument against establishing all sorts of agencies within the executive branch that the president can't control because he can't fire their people.
So it's a red herring.
It's a red herring. The key case is a case called Humphrey's Executor, where it said that the president has to be able to fire people in his branch, which seems to make sense. If you're going to hold him responsible, he has to be able to fire people. Now, there are also exceptions to that have been created. Bush confused the issue because when he issued his signing statement, when he signed the McCain anti-torture bill, he said, use the word unitary power. And that sort of conflated the idea, this limited idea of unitary power with the idea that the signing statement somehow gave him the power to disobey the law.
Right.
And that's sort of a crazy idea. I'm signing this law, but it doesn't apply to me. It is sort of if it doesn't apply to you, don't sign it. The signing is your chance to dissent. And Alito there's no evidence that Alito buys into that
so
crazy position, and he explicitly said he did.
They failed to depict him as someone, or convincingly depict him as someone who is a threat to our liberties.
Right, and he explicitly sort of said he didn't buy the crazy theory.
Now, as you know, my view is that we're at a point in history where we actually need members of the Supreme Court who are actively civil libertarians by persuasion. And he certainly seems not to be that. I mean, he's not biased in that direction. So I'm disappointed, but it looks like we're stuck with him.
Well, why isn't your theory that you just need somebody who believes in the status quo because Bush is going to be asserting all sorts of new power?
When there is another 9/11, and everyone, being human, gets a little crazy, and that includes members of the Supreme Court. So you need somebody at that point. If somebody's going to be your backstop on this, they need to have a pre-existing, robust, pro-civil liberties disposition in order to resist the tide of opinion. And he is definitely not that.
He's not that. But on the other hand, he may be the best you're going to get in the current political circumstances. So.
No, actually, you can imagine there are conservatives who are. There are some people who think part of conservative ideology, properly understood, is a grave suspicion of government power. There are conservative civil libertarians.
But
he is not one.
But those guys believe in property rights, which is even scarier. So
I think I might give him property rights in exchange for this. But anyway,
I wouldn't.
It's a moot point.
Okay.
So we should talk about Iran in that event.
Yeah.
Something that is not yet a resolved issue. Got into a cab yesterday in Washington, D.C. The cab driver was Iranian, struck up a conversation on the weather, quickly moved to the absurdity of the Washington, D.C. cab fare system. And within 3 or 4 minutes, we were talking about Iran itself.
So far, no news in this cab ride.
Hey, just wait a second. This guy was a sage. I mean, in retrospect, I wish I had given him a webcam and turned him into a permanent member of our team, He said, look, a strike, if they strike against the nuclear facilities in Iran, that will only empower the president, Ahmadinejad, as they say. And he was no fan of his, so he argued against that. Then today I open up the New York Times op-ed page, see a piece co-authored by an Iranian blogger that says, Mr. Ahmadinejad might even welcome an American or Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. His faction and government would make full use of the war footing to marginalize its rivals at home and crush the remnants of Iran's civil society. So, the moral of the story is, talk to your cab drivers in Washington if you want tomorrow's news today. The guy actually was a sage. I mean, he said he said this would also empower Bush, probably, this kind of conflict, and that's the way these things go. Both leaders are empowered. It's good for both leaders and bad for both peoples. He was right about that. He also said that you'll be surprised by how soon you get real democracy in Iran, because there is more ferment there than people realize.
Well, he's just spouting that is now the conservative line. The conservative line.
Yeah, but he's not part of the conservative.
No, I understand, but it either makes sense or it doesn't make sense.
But he actually knows Iran. He goes there every year. He came here 12 years ago from Iran.
Bob, but what the conservatives are now saying is they're not lobbying for a military strike. They're lobbying for regime change. Exactly what your cab driver is lobbying for. If you read Austin Bay's blog.
Yeah, but he's not saying you have to engineer it. He's saying, and this gets to the rest.
Well, the conservatives are saying if we just delay it long enough, it'll happen. And judging what happened to this, the
neocons aren't saying that, are they, Mickey?
Yes, they are.
I doubt that.
No.
Which famous neocon is saying we don't have to do anything at all?
They're not saying we don't have to do anything at all, but they're saying they've always been saying that Iran is ripe for revolution. And judging from how many secularists there turned out to be in Iraq, I don't want to put too many eggs on hoping that there.
Yeah, but when neocons say ripe for revolution, they mean it's time for us to get in and stir the drink a little.
Right.
That's why they say things are ripe. It's time to invade. That's what they mean. That's not what I'm talking about.
No, they don't say time to invade. They say it's time to foment discontent. And my doubts are that either fomented or unfomented, either way, the discontent ain't going to happen enough to stop them from getting the bomb. Plus, a really democratic Iran would want the bomb. It's a national aspiration. If you had a completely fairly elected secular administration of Iran, they would want the bomb, all other things being equal.
And they would think that they're entitled to it.
Right,
and
exactly.
You would too if you were Iranian, right?
Right, exactly. So I don't understand how fomenting democracy and regime change is going to stop them from getting the bomb. You could argue that, well, okay, we can let them get the bomb if they're more civil people.
I actually didn't connect the two myself.
Sorry?
I didn't connect the two. I didn't claim there was a connection between the two.
Well, but the whole point is, will they have the bomb? And so
no, that's not the whole point. There's also, you yourself have said that, and I more or less agree, that authoritarianism in that region is conducive to radicalism. That's a big question.
Right.
We don't want radicalism, right?
Okay, fair enough, but what are you going to do about the bomb?
I don't have an instant solution. Let me finish what this guy said, though, is on the democracy front, my hobby horse is that the technologies, microelectronic technologies, have pluralizing tendencies. And I asked him about that after he said this, made this prediction about democracy. And I said, don't you think, like World Wide Web, cell phones, email, and so on really helps us? And he looked at me like I was an idiot. He said, of course. I mean, he goes there, and yet that's a controversial issue in America. But he goes there every year. He sees things on the ground. It's just obvious to him. And yet you get resistance to that thesis here.
Well, but what we learned from Iraq is that we all think that there are all these Democrats because they answer our cell phone calls and they blog, and it looks like there's a movement, and electronic technologies are fomenting this great secularist movement. And then when they have an election, it turns out there are 100 times more fundamentalist Muslim farmers, and the secularists who are on the World Wide Web turn out to be a tiny minority. Now, what you say is right, but the question is, it's a question of degree.
Well,
actually, of course, the
reform forces did well until very recently, and their recent failure was tied to various contingencies, like an ill-advised, boycott or something. I don't know. There is not a trend of non-progressive voters growing in strength in Iran in the long run.
But I've now read about 20 op-eds on Iran and the bomb. And if you don't want the current rulers to have the bomb, none of these people have any particularly convincing strategy to stop them from getting it. I mean, right now we're moving into economic sanctions. I'm not sure they'd be effective even if we could impose severe sanctions, and we're not going to be able to muster the international support to do that. So you're left with an empty cupboard of options. The one thing that I think hasn't been tried is the carrot. I mean, why don't we, we got Ukraine to give up its nuclear ambitions by promising them to integrate them in this prosperous world economy. It seems to me we haven't done enough to dangle the prospect of true prosperity in front of the Iranians.
Well, there was that kind of talk, I think. I mean, what do you mean by true prosperity? Full membership in the WTO or something?
Yeah. It's, hey, the European Common Market.
There was that kind of talk early on. It's not an instrument we completely ignored. But
you've got to get the message through to the Iranian people. I don't know. That's
well,
the only thing I thought
as you know, they're not especially empowered right now.
That's the only thing I thought of. Otherwise, it seems to me this inevitably ends in a military strike. I mean, Israel has promised that they will not let them develop enough fissionable material. So, so Israel is going to do something if we don't.
That may be. I'm not sure whether Israel would do something without American consent. And I don't know whether it would be forthcoming. But I don't know. I don't have a miracle solution. It's certainly our being in Iraq has, by conventional wisdom, complicated, the hand we have to play there, or weakened the hand we have to play there. One thing this New York Times op-ed said is that actually we have more leverage in that regard than is commonly appreciated because Iran has its own problems, some of them are along that very border, including restive minority populations such as Sunnis, and that just as Iran could do things to make life worse for us in Iraq, we could do things to make life worse for them. So
right. I thought that was interesting.
The game is more non-zero sum in a way than it seems. But
yeah, I don't quite also see how Iran is going to pull off the trick of fomenting more Shiite, incursions in Iraq, yet arming the Sunni resistance to Shiites. I mean,
well, it doesn't have to arm the Sunni resistance. It can just make the Shiites less amenable to compromise with the Sunnis than they've been.
Right, but the charge is that they're also arming the Sunni resistance.
That may be, but that's not the only lever they have. They have a lot of influence over kind of the overall tenor of the Shiite attitude toward the Sunnis.
That's true. But it's hard for me to believe that us being in Iraq doesn't give us more leverage as opposed to less.
I'm not at all convinced of that. But as I said, this Times op-ed does point to one sense in which it may give us more.
The alternative was to, now our military threat is exposed as a bit of a paper tiger. I guess that's the argument against it. But, the idea that we could have used Saddam Hussein as our ally against Iran seems...
Well, one thing seems clear to me is a nuclear strike makes it more likely that the mess in Iraq will go regional. And it's not clear to me that that's not worse than they're continuing to develop nuclear weapons for another year. And they would not have them, I think, by the end of the year. But
I don't think anybody thinks the strike's going to come within the year. Do they?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm relieved. Then we can move on to something else.
I think 2 years.
Then next topic in that case. Let's relax.
Okay.
Dick Morris?
Dick Morris wrote a piece in The Hill, which... he claimed that the country is moving left, and because the Bush has set the country's fears, set the country at ease on his issues, so attention naturally turns to democratic issues like health care, and in fact, a lot of the State of the Union speech is going to be about health care. And I agree that the pendulum is moving left, but the question that Morris's piece raises is, will the Democrats be ready for power when it falls into their lap? And I think they're only halfway there. I mean, my hope as a neoliberal would be that the reactionary interest groups that controlled the party before President Clinton would have lost power by the time the Democrats get power again. And it seems to me the party is just as much beholden to, protectionist dying unions now as it was before, probably even more so. It's not clear to me that that there's a vibrant centrist democratic movement ready to take the ball when the Democrats get it handed to them. I guess they're not going to reimpose welfare the way it was, but aside from that, I don't see. I'm not very optimistic.
So he writes a column arguing that the Democrats have deeper sources of power in coming elections than is appreciated, and your mind immediately leaps to the question of whether the Democrats, once in office, will follow the Mickey Mouse agenda, and you're pessimistic.
Well, why shouldn't my mind leap there? That's
perfectly fine. I just wouldn't have expected them to in the first place, since you spend most of your time criticizing Democrats for...
I mean, the one ray of hope, well, there is a pendulum, and people are really sick of the Republicans, I think. I am. And so one would expect the pendulum to swing back. The only thing stopping it is the Republican gerrymander, I think. So the one ray of hope is that the net roots, the so-called Deaniac Democratic base, isn't really beholden to unions at all. It's basically reformist. So if you had a Democrat like Gary Hart, who was a big reformer, he could get the support of those people without being at all beholden to unions, as Gary Hart was not, in fact, beholden to unions. So basically, we need to bring Gary Hart back.
Well, I think your focus is completely misplaced. The great question is not whether unions will have more or less power. The great question is whether the next president will continue to pursue a foreign policy that is a long-term threat to the life of my kids and lots of other Americans. I mean, that just, I think, is the burning issue. And so, well, I don't really care.
I think any Democrat will satisfy you on that's good.
No, far from it. Far from it.
Who wouldn't? Hillary, maybe.
It's almost hard to think of somebody who would, because I think the problem is so grave that it takes really exceptional vision and inspirational powers to succeed.
Kerry wasn't multinational enough for you?
You think all it takes is multinationalism? I think we need a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, and I have not heard any mainstream Democratic candidate talking candidly about that so far as I know.
Dean has said Dean is considered the most anti-Israel of the bunch, I think.
It's not anti-Israel. It's pro-Israel I want. It's intelligently pro-Israel.
Dean is considered the most intelligently pro-Israel of the bunch.
Okay, so now your position is that one of them would fill the bill instead of your previous position that all of them would fill the bill.
Well, if the issue is Israel, yes.
Well,
I thought that the issue
it's a very important issue.
Okay,
but more broadly, there are a lot of other things. You would have to very intelligently pursue, international governance and arms control in ways that I really didn't hear John Kerry talk about. I didn't hear him say anything about that.
Okay, go on.
You'd have to be very mindful of not gratuitously antagonizing people and not continuing to give the world the impression that we're the most arrogant power in the history of it.
I think Kerry could do that. He'd do that
maybe, but Democratic presidents have not always succeeded on this front. I think, Clinton was not without sin on this front. He sometimes had a habit of preaching to the world in ways that I think were counterproductive.
That's true.
I personally think the challenge, is really serious. It would take somebody really exceptional, and I'm not sure I see that person on the horizon.
Okay, I didn't realize that you had such a tall bill to fill. So
that's the situation the world is in, I'm afraid.
I've learned something. Okay.
Which leads us to Munich, I guess. Does it?
You had some more thoughts on Munich.
Yeah. Well, as you know, my view was that the movie's being unfairly maligned by people who oppose its central message. And its central message, as I saw it, was that retaliation for terrorism can, in at least some cases, be counterproductive. In this morning's New York Times, there's a relevant story. The headline is, "Election Roll Won't Soften Hamas Anger at the Israelis." It's based on an interview with this very prominent Hamas leader, and Mahmoud Zahar, and the picture of it has him next to a picture of his son who was killed in an Israeli retaliatory strike in 2003. I mean, actually, I'm not sure whether it was retaliatory, strictly speaking, or preemptive, or both. They tend to be both. I mean, the retaliatory strikes try to target people they think will cause trouble in the future. In any event, I mean, I think if you don't think the fact that his son got killed will complicate negotiations with a politically empowered Hamas, I really disagree with you about human nature. And Hamas is about to get more political power than it has in the January 25th election. So that is to say, more legitimate political power.
But you've claimed that will soften them. So it's a question of which of these factors is more important.
Well, yeah, I say that given how mad this guy is, yeah, it's better. It is better to bring them into the system. Although, actually, if you read the fine print in this paper, it says he skirted the question of whether his group would change its long-standing goal of destroying Israel, and I find that encouraging. And as you know, I have said that that channeling Hamas into the mainstream, into the official political process, will increase the chances that they will eventually let go of the goal of Israel's destruction. Yes.
It's weird. We made some sort of deal with Gaddafi, and specifically with Gaddafi's son, even though we didn't murder. We killed his daughter in an airstrike, a retaliatory airstrike, when we were trying to kill him. And there was a revealing interview with the son. I think it was on 60 Minutes, where they said, "How can you make peace with the U.S.? They killed your sister." And he was not very convincing in terms that he had forgiven us. But yet, apparently, he's cut this deal. So.
Well, that was 20 years after we killed her, though. Right now, it's 2 years after we killed this guy. Another thing this Iranian cab driver said to me, Mickey, he said, you've got to understand that in these traditionalist societies, like Iran and Iraq, the family is everything. And if you kill somebody, you have earned the long-standing enmity of everyone in their family. And I think he's right. He said, you have to understand how different... I mean, I'm telling you, this guy was a sage. I really wish I had handed him a camera and said, please join us.
I have no argument with that. I mean, I have no dog in your Spielberg defense.
But anyway, back to Munich. Yeah, the one thing I did want to add, you added in an afterword that I guess you had quoted Leon Wieseltier's piece, and in your afterthought, you refined your characterization of what he said, or something.
No, I just wanted to quote him exactly. My characterization wasn't.
He's still wrong. He's still wrong. What he said was that all Israelis in that movie are depicted as either cruel with remorse or cruel without remorse, and that's simply wrong.
No, killers with remorse. I thought.
What's that?
Cruel. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Cruel. Okay.
He said they're all depicted as cruel. There are 5 people on this assassination team. As I said, they all. Almost all of them struggle with their scruples, which is not inconsistent with what Leon said, but they simply aren't depicted as cruel. There is one scene in which 3 of the 5 do kill a woman callously, but, first of all, that's 3, not 5. The other 2, I don't see any grounds for characterizing as cruel, and these 3, they're killing a woman who recently gratuitously killed one of their team members, one of the 5. So it's a vengeance killing, and so they're having feelings that are just part of human nature. The revenge they feel at that moment. I mean, when I think of cruel people, I think of people who inflict pain gratuitously, who tear the wings off of flies and things. And I don't think even that one scene involving only 3 of the 5 qualifies as cruelty. So that's still just a false characterization of the movie.
Okay, but. My problem with what Leon wrote was that, well, why would we expect a movie about assassins to focus on the non-cruel Israelis?
No, but the fact is the assassins are fully human. That's the point I'm trying to make. Spielberg doesn't just focus on humanizing the Palestinians.
Right. Okay.
They are all. The movie's moral symmetry is one of its amazing features. There's a shootout scene in it, and this is I don't recall ever feeling this way in a movie before. There's a shootout between two people. The leader of this team and the leading man in the movie is having a shootout with a Palestinian either terrorist or supporter of terrorists or something. But the amazing thing about it is I was not rooting for either one of them to win at that point because Spielberg had so humanized both of them. And I'm sure that was his point. That was clearly the point of this scene, is that you had just heard this Palestinian guy talk about his grievances and his people's grievances. And then you have this scene where it looks like one of them's going to die, and you're not really in favor at that point of either one of them dying. Now, other people might react differently, but that is such a rare moment in movies where killing is depicted as anything other than either clearly good or clearly bad. And by the way, I think this is why David Edelstein, the esteemed movie critic, called this the best movie of 2005. This is a long-standing issue of his that movies always glorify retribution, and this is a case where it's not glorified.
I thought that the defenders of Spielberg said he didn't have a moral symmetry between terrorists and the people who hunt down terrorists, and you're saying that
he didn't?
Yes, and you're saying that the virtue of the movie is that he did have a moral symmetry.
No, I said he did not give equal moral status to the people, the terrorists. This is not one of the terrorists who had killed the Olympic athletes. This is not a guy, we don't know that this guy has killed anybody, okay?
Right.
He's Palestinian, he supports the PLO, whatever. What I said was that there was no moral equivalence asserted between Palestinians killing innocent Israeli athletes and Israelis killing people who had killed innocent people, okay? Leon's piece asserts that is the moral equivalence intended, and I don't see any signs of that.
But there is some moral equivalence between the Israelis killing somebody and the people they're trying to kill, who you say are not people who kill innocent civilians?
Well, at that point, this was a guy who, again, so far as we know, the Palestinian, so far as we know, has not killed anybody ever. And I'm saying that the feeling evoked was, I don't want either of these guys to die right now. They both seem fully human, and that was the feeling evoked. But again, the kind of moral equivalence asserted in Leon's piece, and it's explicit, is not there. That's a moral equivalence between Palestinians killing innocent people and Israelis killing guilty people. People who have killed.
So none of these Palestinians who we feel for are shown killing innocent people? I'm asking. I don't know the answer.
Well, actually, that's the case, yes. They are not shown killing innocent people. They have a vaguer connection to Palestinian terror. In this particular case, his connection was completely unknown.
Okay. Well, I ran into Spielberg's PR guy at a party last night, and I sent him the video link, so...
Did he say we'd be getting an infusion of investment money from Steven Spielberg soon?
No, he didn't even
respond. That has been my aim all along.
He didn't even respond to my email, but soon, I expect that plane trip to Hollywood soon. Okay, I have one thing to say about Brokeback Mountain. There was a story, I think a bogus story, about how it's becoming the new date movie. It had very little evidence other than they found some heterosexual couples who went to the movie and enjoyed it. But I actually think it's a pretty good date movie. Because for two reasons. First, the relationship of Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal is so unconvincing. And that, you go to a date with a member of the opposite sex, and you can say two things. You can say, gee, what we got going is better than what those guys got going. And you can say, you can breathe a joint sigh of relief that, if you're a heterosexual, that you're heterosexual and I'm not going to screw up your life the way Heath Ledger screwed up the life for his wife.
That's a good line. You could almost use that as an opening line at a bar, I think. Hi. I'm not going to screw up your life the way...
I'll go try that. I'm not gay.
But the other good thing is sometimes after a movie with somebody you're dating, you feel threatened by their falling in love with the male character, or they feel threatened by things you say about how attractive the female character was. Both of those things are kind of unlikely, right?
No, they're likely because people fall in love with Heath Ledger.
Yeah, but it doesn't threaten you the way it would if he were depicted as a womanizer, right?
That's an interesting question. I think it does.
Oh.
Anyway,
I do have to. I'm sorry. I do have to subject you to ritual humiliation before we leave, Mickey. I mean, as everyone knows, you predicted the commercial failure of Brokeback Mountain.
Two things.
This week's numbers are robust. It's now moved up to number 5 on the daily gross, And if you compare its per theater gross, it is so far ahead of the 4 movies higher than it on the overall gross list that it's mind-boggling.
Well, but
it's still in a fairly limited release.
Well, it's still in a limited. What we haven't seen is will it succeed when it goes wider? Now it's only like 400.
I would say that initially your prediction did not involve this. It was not so fine-grained.
I said two things.
I said predictions.
I said it wouldn't be embraced by the red states and by mainstream America. And we won't know the answer to that question until it goes wide.
Right now it wouldn't gross $50 million, and it seems on track to do that.
And now it's the second prediction where I'll probably be wrong. But the first prediction is not proven wrong because it's in 400 cherry-picked theaters in major metropolitan areas. We'll see what numbers it does when it goes wide. Now, the complicating factor is that they're not going to take it wide until it's won all sorts of awards. So I may be wrong there. Maybe it'll do very well when it breaks out.
Well, anyway, I'd hate to be in your shoes right now, buddy. We've gone way too long, but there is a guy in a blog. His name is maybe Corey, I think, or something, and we'll link to him. But he had the ingenious idea of downloading these videos, Blogging Heads videos specifically, and using Windows Media Player to play them at 1.4 times the normal speed, real time saver, and it is perfectly audible.
So we recommend that to our viewers?
We recommend it heartily, and we'll link to him as a reward.
Friends used to use that technique to study for exams. It works.
Yeah.
So maybe if we talk really fast, we'll be unintelligible at 1.4 speeds. 1.4 times speed.
I'm afraid not.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, good. So we have gone along. So we'll see you soon.
We'll see you.
Okay.